She arrived on a Tuesday, and the town decided, before she had even set down her satchel, that she was a woman without a story worth telling. No one asked her name. No one offered a hand. They only watched her walk the length of the main road with her chin level and her shoes thin from travel, and they filed her away as trouble, the way people do when they have already decided not to look closer. There was a debt in her pocket and a dead man's silence behind her, and neither one gave her a name the town would use. She was called things instead. Not unkindly, always, but without any warmth either, the way one speaks of weather rather than people. She took a room at the edge of things, where the roof leaned and the well ran dry, and she understood without being told twice that this was the only place left for a woman the town had already judged. Some things are too large for naming, and what grew in that valley over the following seasons was one of them. It did not begin with a declaration. It began with a fence mended before dawn, a bucket of water carried without a word, a man who worked at the edge of her land the way a man works when he is not asking for anything in return. He said little. He asked nothing. And that, more than any words could have, was its own kind of answer. The town kept its distance and its judgment, the way towns do when they have decided a story is already finished. But there is a difference between what a town decides and what is actually true. And that difference would take root slowly in the quiet hours between supper and dark, in the space where two people who owed each other nothing began, without meaning to build something neither one had a name for yet. Then came the words, not shouted, not staged, not spoken for anyone else to hear. Only a whisper, plain as the ground beneath them, that gave her something the town had refused her since the day she stepped off the platform. Not a reputation, not a rescue. Something quieter and harder to take away. A place. And a name that finally meant she belonged somewhere. Her name was Willa Shane, though it would be 3 full months before anyone in Cedar Fork used it out loud. She had come west on a promise made by a man she had married by proxy and buried before she ever saw his face. A rancher named Elias Shane, who had died of fever 2 weeks before her train reached the territory. The lawyer who met her at the depot did not soften the matter. He handed her a folder of papers, told her the debt on the land was hers now by marriage, and suggested, without quite saying so, that she might do better to take the next train back east. She did not take it. She signed where he pointed, thanked him for his time, and asked directions to a piece of ground she had never seen and a house, she was told, was not finished. Cedar Fork sat low in a valley that had once been good for wheat and was, by the year Willa arrived, good mostly for rumor. The bank had foreclosed on 3 families that winter alone, and the town had grown careful with its sympathy, rationing it out to people it judged worth the trouble. A widow arriving with a dead man's debt and no children to soften the picture did not strike anyone as worth the trouble. The general store clerk weighed her coin twice before making change. The Reverend's wife looked at her the way one looks at weather that might ruin a wash line. Nobody was cruel exactly. They were simply careful, and carefulness applied long enough wears the same shape as cruelty. The house on Shane land was less a house than a frame with intentions. Elias had built the walls and half the roof before the fever took him, and what remained open to sky he had covered with canvas that had since gone brittle with sun. Willa spent her first week patching what she could reach and leaving the rest to weather, sleeping in the one dry corner with a shawl for a blanket and a lamp she rationed like medicine. She learned the well was dry within the first 3 days, which meant a 2-mile walk to the creek with a yoke and 2 buckets. A walk she made before light so no one in town would see a Shane widow carrying water like a hired girl. Pride, she had learned early, was one of the few things poverty could not take from a person unless she surrendered it herself. The debt itself was modest by the standards of men with land that produced. and enormous by the standards of a woman with none. $40 owed to the bank by Autumn, secured against acreage that had not seen a full crop in 2 years. Harlan Voss, who held the note personally as well as through the bank, made a point of riding out to introduce himself within her second week, hat in hand and voice arranged into something meant to pass for concern. He suggested, in the manner of a man accustomed to being agreed with, that a woman alone could not be expected to manage such a debt, and that he would be glad to take the land off her hands at a figure that would clear her name of it entirely. Willa thanked him for his trouble and told him she intended to keep the land. He left with his hat back on his head and his opinion of her unchanged, which was, she understood, its own kind of warning. What she had, against a debt of $40 and a roof open to the sky, was very little that could be counted. She had a trunk of her mother's linens, unsold because no one in a town this poor had money for good cloth. She had a garden plot gone to weed that she began clearing her first free evening, on her knees in the dirt until the light failed. She had a manner of walking through town, upright and unhurried, that some mistook for coldness and others, fewer of them, recognized as simple refusal to be smaller than her circumstances required. And she had a habit, formed in childhood and never broken, of speaking to no one about her troubles, which meant the town's picture of her was built entirely from what they saw, and none of what she carried. It was in her third week that she first noticed the man at the far boundary of Shane land, mending a stretch of fence that was not, by any measure of deed or debt, his responsibility to mend. He worked alone, in the gray hour after dawn, and left before she had gathered enough courage to walk out and ask him his business. She did not know yet that his name was Nathan Cooper, or that he ran a small horse operation 2 sections over, or that he had buried no wife and claimed no family that anyone in Cedar Fork could name with certainty. She knew only that the fence, which had leaned since before Elias died, stood straighter each morning she checked it, and that no bill for the work ever came. By the end of that month, the shape of her days had settled into something she could bear, if not yet something she could call good. Water at dawn before the town woke. The garden, weeded and turned, beginning to show green in rows she had planted from seed, saved out of her mother's things. The debt, still $40, still due by Autumn, sitting in the back of her mind the way a stone sits in a shoe. Tolerable only because there was no choice but to keep walking. She had not yet spoken more than a dozen words to Nathan Cooper. She had not yet understood what it meant that a stranger would mend a fence for a woman he owed nothing, but she had noticed. The way a person notices weather changing before they can name the front moving in, that something in Cedar Fork had shifted its attention toward her, and that not all of that attention was unkind. Some things arrive quietly enough that a person does not recognize them as beginnings until much later, when she looks back and understands that this was where the ground first started to hold. The morning she finally spoke to him, Willa had not planned to. She had come out to check the fence line as she did most days, more from habit now than suspicion, and found him already there, setting a post into ground he had dug the evening before. He straightened when he heard her step, nodded once, and went back to his work as though her presence required no further comment. She stood a moment with the yoke still on her shoulders, water sloshing faintly in the buckets, and asked him plainly why a man mended fence that was not his to mend. He did not look up right away. When he did, he said only that a fence down was a fence down, whoever owned the ground behind it, and that seemed to him reason enough. His name, she learned that morning, was Nathan Cooper, and he ran horses on a section 2 miles east, though he offered the fact, the way a man offers directions rather than a biography. He asked nothing of her in return, not her circumstances, not the debt she carried, not why a widow with a dead man's name was hauling water before dawn instead of hiring it done. He simply finished the post, tested it with one hand to be sure it held, and told her the rest of the line would want doing before the first frost. Then he touched his hat and walked back toward his own land. And Willa stood watching him go the way a person watches something she is trying to place, uncertain yet whether to be grateful or wary of a kindness that asked for nothing in return. It was gratitude, she decided, though she was slow to say so even to herself. Within the week he had brought a length of good rope for her well bucket, left coiled on her porch rail without a word of explanation, and she had understood it as answer to a complaint she had made once in passing to the store clerk, never expecting it to travel. She left him a jar of preserves in return, set on the same rail, and said nothing about it either. This was the shape their acquaintance took in those early weeks, an exchange conducted almost entirely in objects and gestures, as if speech might spoil something too new yet to bear the weight of it. Neither one seemed in a hurry to name what was forming, and there was a kind of relief in that, for a woman who had learned to expect very little from the world's attention. The garden came in stronger than she had dared hope, and by late summer she had beans and squash enough to trade at the store for flour and lamp oil, a small independence that mattered more to her than its size suggested. She fixed what she could of the roof herself, standing on a ladder Nathan had left leaning against the barn without comment, canvas patched with scraps until the worst of the gaps were closed. The nights were still hard, the debt still sitting where it had always sat, but there was a rhythm to her days now that had not existed in her first weeks, and rhythm, she had learned, was its own kind of mercy. She began to sleep without waking at every sound, which she took as evidence that some part of her had decided the ground beneath her might, after all, be worth trusting. Not everyone in Cedar Fork softened at the same pace. Martha Voss, wife to the man who held Willa's note, made her opinions known at the Sunday gathering with the particular skill of a woman who had never once raised her voice to say something unkind. She remarked, to no one in particular but loud enough for the pews around her, that it was a curious thing how quickly a widow found help from a bachelor with no family to answer to, and that folks ought to be careful what they called Christian charity. Willa heard it, as she was meant to, and said nothing. The way a person says nothing when arguing would only prove the accusation had landed. She walked home that evening with her chin no lower than it had been the day she arrived, though the walk felt longer than it had any right to. Nathan heard of it too, by the ordinary channels of a small town, and his response was not to defend himself in the store or the church, but simply to keep coming at the same hour, doing the same unglamorous work, as though Martha Voss's opinion were weather that did not concern him. This was, Willa came to understand, the whole of his character laid out plainly for anyone who cared to look. He did not argue with judgment. He did not perform innocence. He simply continued being exactly what he had always been, and let the continuing speak for him. There was a dignity in it that she recognized because she practiced a version of it herself, and recognizing it in another person felt, for the first time since Elias's death, like being less alone in a particular kind of effort. Harvey Voss returned once more before the season turned, this time with a figure written on paper rather than spoken aloud, an offer for the land dressed up as a favor to a woman who could not be expected to manage on her own. Willa read it standing on her own porch, in the plain light of an ordinary afternoon, and handed it back without asking to keep a copy. She told him the debt would be paid by the date agreed, in full, and that she had no further business to discuss regarding the land itself. He left displeased in the manner of a man unused to refusal, and she went back to shelling beans on the step as though nothing of consequence had occurred, though her hands, she noticed, were not quite steady until he was well down the road. It was near the end of that same week that Nathan brought over a length of chain and a come-along, saying only that the well housing wanted reinforcing before winter set the ground hard, and stayed through the afternoon to see it done properly. They worked mostly in silence, passing tools back and forth with the ease of people who had stopped needing to narrate every action to each other. At one point, reaching past her for the wrench, His hand came to rest beside hers on the housing rail, not over it, simply beside it, and stayed there a moment longer than the task required before he drew it back and went on working. Neither of them remarked on it, but Willa found, walking back to the house that evening with supper to start, that she was thinking of very little else, and that the thought did not frighten her the way she might once have expected it to. The debt came due on a Wednesday, and Willa had counted toward that date the way some people count toward winter, aware of it always, whether she looked at it directly or not. She had $40 set aside by then, earned in small increments from the garden's trade and from linens sold at last to a family newly arrived with money and no household goods to their name. She walked into the bank herself, counted the sum onto the desk in front of Harvey Voss, and watched him mark the note paid in full with an expression that suggested he had expected, even hoped, for a different outcome. It was not triumph she felt walking out, only a kind of settling. The sense of a stone finally worked loose from a shoe she had worn so long she had nearly forgotten the discomfort of it. She told Nathan of it that same evening, finding him at the fence line as she so often did now, and he received the news the way he received most things, with a nod and a quiet that asked no further explanation. But something in his stillness afterward suggested the weight had mattered to him more than his manner let on. He asked after a moment what she meant to do now that the land was fully hers, free and clear of any claim but her own, and she found she did not have a ready answer. She had spent so long working simply to keep the ground beneath her that she had given little thought to what came after keeping it, and the question sat with her longer than she expected it to. The autumn deepened quickly that year, the way it does in valleys closed in by hills, the light going low and gold in the afternoons, and the nights arriving with a chill that spoke plainly of the winter behind it. Willa put up what she could from the garden, jars lining the shelf Nathan had built for her without being asked, wood stacked along the wall of a house that finally, after months of patching, kept the weather where it belonged. She had grown, without quite noticing the growing, into someone who moved through her days with a kind of ease she had not known since before Elias's death, and she understood that the ease had as much to do with Nathan's steady presence as with that it now settled. Martha Voss had not softened, not entirely, but her comments had thinned to occasional silences rather than open remarks, the kind of retreat that comes not from a change of heart, but from running out of fresh material to work with. Willa no longer walked home from church bracing for what might be said behind her. She had learned, over the slow accumulation of that year, that a town's judgment, left unfed, tends eventually to starve, and that the surest way to starve it was simply to keep living plainly and well, offering nothing further for it to chew on. This was not victory exactly. It was something quieter, closer to the ground settling after a long rain, water finding at last where it belonged. It was on an ordinary Tuesday, not a day marked for anything in particular, that Nathan came by later than his usual hour, after the light had gone but before full dark, carrying nothing this time, no tool or rope or length of chain, only himself. Willa was on the porch shelling the last of the season's beans, and she looked up at the sound of his boots on the path with the small, unremarkable pleasure that had become, without her quite noticing, the shape of most of her evenings now. He did not sit right away. He stood at the base of the steps a moment, hat in hand, in the manner of a man working up to something he had turned over a long while before deciding to say it aloud. She asked him plainly if something troubled him, because that was her way, to meet a silence with a direct question rather than let it stretch unattended. He said no, and then, after a pause long enough that she nearly asked again, that he had been thinking on the land, and on the winter coming, and on the fact that a woman alone, even a woman as capable as she had proven herself, ought not to face a hard season without more than a fence line between her and trouble. She told him, not unkindly, that she had faced a hard season alone before and come through it, which was true, and which he did not dispute. He only said that coming through a thing alone was not the same as it being the only way to come through it. He climbed the 2 steps to the porch then, slow, the way a man moves when he is not asking for anything beyond being heard, and set his hand on the rail beside hers, not over it. The same small distance he had kept at the well housing months before, as though some part of him understood that closing that last space was a decision that belonged to her to make, not to him to take. He said her name, Willa, plainly, without decoration, and told her that he did not have much to offer beyond what she had already seen of him: steady work and a quiet house, and no family to answer to but whatever family he might yet be given. And then he said the words plainly, without performance, the way a man states a fact he has already settled in his own mind, long before saying it aloud. "You belong here," he said, "with me." She did not answer right away, and he did not seem to expect her to. The evening held very still around them, the kind of stillness that follows a thing finally said after being carried unspoken for longer than either party had admitted. Willa set down the bowl of beans in her lap, careful, unhurried, and put her hand at last atop his on the rail, not gripping, only resting, an answer offered in the same plain language he had used to ask. Neither of them said anything further for a long while. Some things, she had come to understand, were too large for naming outright, and were better left to sit quietly between 2 people until the truth of them settled on its own, the way frost settles overnight without any fuss at all, and is simply there, undeniable by morning. The wedding, when it came, was small enough to fit inside the front room of the church without crowding, and quiet enough that no one mistook it for spectacle. Willa wore a dress cut from her mother's good linen, the same cloth she had once considered selling to make ends meet, and Nathan stood in a coat she had never seen him wear before, borrowed or bought for the occasion. She never asked which. The Reverend spoke the words plainly, without embellishment, the way the whole valley seemed to have agreed things ought to be said, and when it came time for Nathan to answer, he did so without hesitation, in the same steady voice he used for every ordinary fact of his life. Few attended. Fewer still had attended out of anything but curiosity when Willa first arrived, and there was a kind of quiet justice in the fact that those who came now came because they wished to, not because scandal required their presence. Martha Voss was among them, seated near the back, and she said nothing unkind that day, nor anything at all, which was, for a woman of her habits, as close to an apology as the valley was ever going to offer. She brought a jar of preserves to leave at the house afterward, set on the porch rail in the same wordless fashion Nathan had once left rope and tools, and Willa understood the gesture for what it was, without requiring it be explained. Some debts are paid in coin, and some in silence, finally withheld, and the valley, it seemed, had decided to close its account with her the same way it had once opened it, without ceremony, simply by ceasing to speak of what no longer needed saying. The winter that followed was hard, as winters in that valley always were, but it was hard in the ordinary way rather than the way she had faced her first one, alone with a debt and a roof open to sky. Nathan moved his horses onto Shane land that autumn, and the 2 operations folded into one the way 2 households do when they stop keeping separate ledgers, and the barn that had stood half empty through Willa's first year filled with stock and feed, and the sound of a man's boots crossing the yard before dawn, a sound she had come to listen for the way some people listen for church bells. She no longer walked to the creek before light to avoid being seen. There was nothing left in her circumstances that required hiding, and the freedom of that, small as it seemed, was among the things she treasured most. In the spring, word reached them that Harvey Voss had sold his interest in the bank and moved east, whether from shame or simple lack of appetite for a town that no longer needed his particular kind of leverage. No one could say for certain, and no one troubled themselves overmuch to find out. The valley had other matters to attend to by then. The wheat came in that year better than it had in 3 seasons, water returning to fields that had gone dry under Elias's brief ownership, and Willa found herself, more mornings than not, standing at the edge of green rows she had planted herself, astonished still at the simple fact of abundance where there had once been only debt. She did not forget the hardship of her first year. She simply found that it no longer defined her the way it once had, having been folded over time into something larger and kinder than the shame the town had first assigned her. The wind moved through the pines above the ridge the same as it always had, indifferent to the fortunes of the people living beneath it, and the fire in the hearth Nathan had built burned each evening the same steady way, warming a house that had once known only canvas and cold. The horses stood in the corral at dusk, the way horses always do, unhurried, unbothered by the long road that had brought a woman and a debt and a stranger's kindness together under one roof. Smoke rose from the chimney into a sky that did not care whether a town forgave a widow or not, and the creek, frozen thin at its edges by the season's first true cold, ran on beneath the ice exactly as it had before Willa ever arrived, and would long after every person in that valley had gone to dust. The fire burned. The world continued. And that was the story of Willa and Nathan Cooper, a woman who arrived in a town that would not speak her name and left it known by everyone who mattered, not for the debt she once carried, but for the quiet strength with which she carried it, and for the home she built from nothing but a satchel, a spine, and a man who asked for nothing in return but the chance to stay. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this one. Thank you.